Hello, my name's Renate and I'm going to talk about some of my books. I've written 8 books so far, but I'm going to talk about 5 books. I'm going to explain a little bit about it and then I'll read a part of a story, so not the entire story, but I will explain a little bit why I wrote the book and what it's about. So I also have a painting behind me and I used it for the cover of my latest book, Tapas of Tales. I use my paintings on the covers of all my books. So here you go. The first book I'm going to talk about is Secret Thoughts. Now, Secret Thoughts is a book that I started writing when I was still in the Netherlands, so it's more than 20 years ago. And I was challenged by a friend journalist who told me, why don't you write short stories? Because I loved writing, but I never really seriously did it. And write from a male perspective, an object perspective and female perspective. And he said erotic books really sell well, so I did that, but they're not usually erotic. They're actually very quirky, they're a little bit surreal, and they're very short. It's called Secret Thoughts, Sensual and Quirky Flash Fiction with a Twist. I'm reading out the first part of a story. Passing by. The weather was beautiful. The sun was shining and a cool breeze made the temperature pleasant. Sitting in the low windowsill in front of the open window in a cozy student house in the city centre, she felt somewhat melancholy. Unable to understand why, even though she felt good, she still dragged along this slumbering feeling of sadness. She poured herself another cup of green tea and watched the activity in the street beneath her. The owner of the cafe on the corner of the street placed 4 tables and chairs on the narrow pavement for guests to enjoy the lovely springtime sunshine. Closed shops opened their doors so that fresh air could drive out the rather musty winter atmosphere. It seems as if everyone was wearing smiles on their faces. A happy Saturday morning. The wonderful weather, the reason why summer clothes had been taken out of attics. Frivolous dresses in lively colours, t-shirts with loud slogans, fashionable nail polish on toes happily peeking out of flip-flops and sandals. All this made the sunny scene even more intense. Daydreaming, staring down into the street, she saw that the tables of the cafe were occupied by a group of students who, just a little bit too noisily, embroidered their nocturnal adventures in word and gesture. Love was in the air, bellies full of butterflies. The second book I'm going to talk about is called Reflections from La Herradura, that is the village where I live. This is a book for which I interviewed artists like dancers, musicians, writers, painters. They all shared their stories. I wrote that mostly in the first person and with their permission. And it's also an itinerary because I make the stories take place in the village, on different places in the village. I'm going to read out a little bit of history in one of the chapters. I explain a very profound thing that happened here. The book's also available in Spanish, by the way. I'm going to read out A Secret National Disaster. Whilst much of La Herradura's history has been lost, misinterpreted or lost in translation, some of the base past has been intentionally kept secret. In October 1562, La Herradura became the scene of an historic event which was kept quiet for many years and to this day has remained relatively unknown to the world, even to many people in Spain. This natural disaster, one of the greatest catastrophes in Spanish naval history, happened on the 19th of October and cost the lives of around 5,000 people. The day before, a fleet of 28 galleys, with a mission to defend the Spanish coast from pirate attacks, set sail from Malaga harbour for Oran and Mozambique in northern Africa. However, when strong winds picked up, they were forced to seek shelter beside the Punta de la Mona in the Herradura Bay. Although these Mediterranean warships were huge, holding more than 500 crew members each, they were clearly no match for the weather. When the wind turned, 25 of them crashed into each other and were destroyed. Many of the people in the galleys jumped into the sea, but most were dragged down by the undercurrent or killed by floating debris. 2,000 people survived, mostly galley slaves, whose chains had been broken before the disaster. These slaves were later recaptured. The disaster was kept quiet as Spain didn't want its enemies to know that a large part of its armado had been lost. So that's the story about La Herradura. Now I'm going to read about a book that I actually wrote during the lockdown, and it's called Memories of World War II, sorry. And it's a teenager's experience during the Second World War in the Netherlands. And for this book, I interviewed my now 19-year-old father. And this book is dedicated to his brother. His whole family was in the resistance, and his brother was shot in the back when he was 18 during an action for the resistance, and he died 2 years after the war. I'm going to read a little part when my father's brother was lying in the bed. His name was Wim. Wim is lying in his bed. We were just joking around. He's in a lot of pain because of his back problems, but he is holding up well. Wim is my oldest brother. I'm 3 years younger than him. He is a lot calmer than me, as I'm indisputably the rascal in our family. It is difficult for me to understand how he can accept his situation so well. He's very religious. He talks about Jesus as if he is his best friend. It gives him much comfort. He's 18 years old and he was shot in the back. The wound just won't heal. He can barely walk and lies on his bed all day in the front room on the first floor. Every day I keep him company for a couple of hours, and my endless chatter always makes him laugh. Today's no different. My youngest brother is with us. He's 4 years old and is sitting on the ground playing with some wooden blocks. I walk to the window and look outside. I see the railway platform in front of our house. The station is patrolled by German soldiers. Passenger trains are no longer coming in, as the transport of people was stopped quite some time ago. Everything has been put to a halt, apart from the occasional German freight train passing by. I look at the billboards and some of the wooden benches and see a soldier with a rifle gun in his hands. At some point we look each other straight in the eye. I'm feeling mischievous and wave at him. "Weg dort! Weg dort!" he shouts angrily, indicated that I have to move away from the window. But I don't listen to him. It all happens in a split second as he points his gun at me and fires. I'm totally freaked out. Fortunately, the bullet has missed me and hits the roof gutter. Wim shouts, "Get away from that window!" To read more, you have to, of course, buy the book. The fourth book I'm going to read for you is called Cheers, Breaking the Silence One Voice at a Time. I revised this book because I've written it in 2011, but it's still very, very up to date because this is a problem that occurs to many people. I myself lived with an alcoholic for 12 years. But for this book, I interviewed people throughout Europe in all sorts of countries, in Norway, Holland, Ireland, England, Spain, and more. And the people shared their stories and gave me permission to write their stories in a personal way. So it's a storybook. It's not so much a scientific book, although I do give information about where to get help, how to recognize an alcoholic, etc. But I'm going to read a story that I actually wrote as the interview because it's quite profound, especially because this concerns a mother who's drinking. And actually, there's quite a few stories of mothers who are drinking in this book. It is not a problem that just occurs with men. So in this interview, I asked the lady, what was the scariest moment? She answered, when I was about 14 years old, and I took my mother to the hospital for yet another attempt to dry out. I strongly remember feeling liberated. I felt like shouting for joy. That's how happy I was. Happy that she wasn't at home. I stayed at the house on my own, went to school, took care of the dog, the housework, my meals, and at night I slept at the neighbors. Suddenly, after just 1 week, she knocked on the door. That was a moment of total fear for me. She had no key and I had to let her in. Her admission had been on a voluntary basis and the hospital couldn't keep her there against her will. My mother felt she was cured. It was one of the darkest moments for me. Even now, talking about it, I feel it in my legs. It makes me feel sick. Then I asked, what was the most painful moment for you? And she answered, when she no longer recognized me, her own daughter, because she has Korsakoff syndrome. Then I asked, how old were you when you left home? She said, I once gave her a choice, an ultimatum. I told her that either the bottle had to go or I would go. I ended up being kicked out and I had nowhere to live. I was 15 years old. Now, this book you can also get as a Kindle book, and you can also get it as a download from my website as the World War II book and my last book, which I will show to you now, which is called Tapas of Tales. And I will read a story about this as well. These are short stories, a little bit fun, about my life in Spain, things that did happen to me, but I'm writing them in a kind of a funny way, well, I hope. I'm going to read a story that had happened to me quite some years ago, and it's called Elves with an Opinion, and I do want to explain that because I was phoned by this lady, and she said her elves told her that we should have an exhibition together. Anyway, here's the story. This is a true story, but I write it a bit funny, I think. Elves with an Opinion. A few years ago, on a very hot summer's day, my telephone rang. Hi Renate, how are you? Asks Monica, a German lady whom I met years earlier at an art fair. Monica asks me whether we could meet up, as her partner Gerda had been told that we had to exhibit our work together in a village along the coast. I was curious, so the next day I drive down the long winding mountain road to visit a remote cottage tucked away in a sea of green avocado plantations and silver green olive trees. I turn right into a dirt track which leads to the house of Monica and Gerda, and I'm greeted by the two large-sized ladies with big smiles on their round faces. It feels as if I'm entering a delusional fairy-tale world, and I suddenly think, oh my God, they're going to eat me. However, I'm warmly welcomed by the two white witches, as they call themselves. They are both wearing similar big blue dresses without sleeves, with a kangaroo pouch pocketed on the front. Their huge breasts are dangling clearly visible and freely under the thin cotton fabric. It feels soft, hot and humid during the awkwardly long hug. Messy long grey hair is framing their white, sweaty faces, completing the picture. Makeup doesn't fit into their world. I'm invited into their home, an oasis of calm in a wonderfully warm atmosphere. Everywhere I look, I see angels, Tutankhamun replicas, ceramic sculptures and Buddha images. I feel relaxed and at ease. Whilst Monica is giving me a cup of herbal tea, Gerda tells me about the elves and fairies that are invisible to most people. So here's the information about my books. I will share below or above where you can find them and buy them. And I wish you a really nice day. Bye bye.